Welcome to Focus on Albany. I'm Cynthia Pooler, and I am so honored today to be interviewing my good friend Leon VanDyke. And Leon is going to give an overview of his life. And once we do the overview, then we're going to break it up into different categories and talk at length about the different aspects. So the first issue is growing up in Philadelphia. Leon?
Okay. Well, first, I want to thank you and Greg and hundreds of friends who encouraged me to do this. Uh, Quite frankly, when I think of my growing up, where from a kid from South Philadelphia, I could never imagine that a guy like me in my past, someone would know what my life had been all about. And it has been, to say the least, amazing to me. And I feel blessed and honored uh, and appreciated. I guess that's what you call it. That someone, or you think someone's here about the kinds of things I did in my past. I talking about over 50 years of being socially and politically active in some of the most, I think, significant civil and human rights struggles uh, in the 20th century. And I really also feel blessed to have met the kinds of the people that I met during that sojourn. And in part, I would like to say, maybe it's because of the age, you get nostalgic about your childhood and how things brought you there. I think if me being an educator, that in itself is a marvel in my neighborhood, where I was at least under 10, if not 6 or 7, but under 10, when I saw a person get killed in a fight. And and over the years, my first tender years of my life, and as a young man, I've seen at least a half a dozen people murdered. Like, and at that time in my neighborhood, uh, we thought it was normal. Uh, and so to think that uh, in these years of struggle that I met such giants in the social and human rights movement, such as, just to make my point, such as people like Coretta Scott King, Fannie Lou Hamer, Betty Shabazz, who some of you might know the name and might be familiar to, who was the wife of Malcolm X, uh, Winnie Mandela. All of these, and one would want to have a kid from Southport up here in that neighborhood that I was talking about, or in the jail that I was in. I was in, spent time twice in maximum security prison or Eastern State Penitentiary those of you who are in the field of criminology know what I'm talking about when I say that this is maxi security. We wake up one day and we see guys so depressed that they hung themselves with their own sheet. So to be able to sit and talk with some of the social giants of our time, I knew that John Lewis, as a young man, 24, 25, when I met him in 1966. And he crossed over the Selma Bridge, Bloody Sunday, 1965. I knew people like who were not household words, who were highly respected in that movement, like C.T. Vivian, Bernard Lafayette, who was one of the activists in SNCC, but who was just as critical and important to that march on Selma as John Lewis, but not as well known. And so when I look at that, of the things that I was involved in, and we'll talk about, that I think it's irrelevant. It's relevant. I'm sorry. I think that it's relevant to the movement of the day. The issues that we're talking about. I was just watching TV the last week or 2 weeks, and we were very present about voting rights. Well, that was the issue there. Back in the 60s, so it's very important for us to where we're at. It was the issue when they signed the Constitution, but who would vote and who wouldn't vote. And when the signing of our Constitution, and even the big lie, that they talk about Trump and the big lie that he didn't lose the election. Well, I would argue that's no less than the big lie that Ben Franklin talked about after the signing of the Declaration of Independence. That what they adopted, that our founding fathers adopted, was a republic, democratic republic. They differ. We know this. What does it say about us? We know that women couldn't vote when they signed the Declaration of Independence. Blacks and Native Americans couldn't vote. White men who didn't have property couldn't vote. How the hell is that a democracy? And it's not to denigrate the founding fathers. That they didn't make a contribution to life. There was many who argued that they would have liked to did that, but it was an experiment. But that was all about right to vote. After the Civil War, and we got the 15th Amendment. for blacks to vote. We're still fighting over that issue today, and I think that I, I Mr. Board people, I think that these topics and how we dealt with them had some relevance. I was saying to a young man I was talking with about last year, and, and he was talking about it. See, he was depressed in terms of us about the vote, and we seemed the conservatives seemed to be going forward. We seemed to be disorganized. And what could we do? And the thing of it is that we made changes. That's one of the things I think that's throughout these topics that we'll be talking about. Growing up in Philadelphia, the brothers who that was a significant part of my life. It changed my life. It saved my life. My being involved in it, I don't know where I would have been at if I hadn't gotten involved. I know where a whole bunch of friends of mine who I went to school with and lived in the old neighborhood, why them died at a young age in a violent life. And I have no reason to believe that would not have happened to me, no matter how lucky, that opinion. But, I mean, I recall so many times in my search for social justice, I say to myself, how the hell did I get here? Some of my old buddies in Philadelphia, when I'd go to visit, because I'd always go to visit the family, always at Thanksgiving and Christmas. We always went back home for Thanksgiving dinner. And I kept that tradition up all of them passed away with my daughter, my oldest daughter, 50 years old, which is an absolute blessing to me, brings a smile to my face every time I think of her. I used to bring her to Thanksgiving dinners to meet her aunts. My mother had 3 sisters, and she was able to meet most of them before they died. My cousins and we, but I one.
So Leon, you how old were you when you left Philadelphia?
I left Philadelphia when I was about 26, 27. I'd come out of, my mother lived here. She worked for the nurse's aide for Albany Medical Center. She worked, God bless her soul, she worked for Albany Medical Center for 35 years, 40 years. She got a big retirement. She was a nurse's aide. She was like a fixture there. But so I came to see her. I hadn't seen her for about 5 years because I'd spent 4 of my years at the Eastern State Penitentiary, as I mentioned to you. And so I came to see her. I got out of jail December. That's September, October, 1960.
Mm-hmm.
And I came to visit her here. She was so grateful to see me. But I got out of jail. I went to see my aunts.
Mm-hmm. And she lived in Albany also?
And she lived in Albany, and she
Okay.
worked for Albany Medical. She worked for 2 jobs. She worked at Albany Medical Center, and she worked at Albany Nursing Home.
Okay.
So that's when I came here.
Okay.
As I said, out of and by the way, it's where it's not where the first time I met Malcolm, but he came to speak in 1956, 57. He came to speak at the prison, and but he wasn't known as he was known then. And Muslims, the Black Muslims, as they call it, or the Nation of Islam, as they prefer to be called, they're people that they really organized with street Black males like myself during that time. They were very effective in attracting us. And I was at that time, I was very well known in my neighborhood, your neighborhood, South Florida. You're talking about 10, 15 blocks, maybe 250,000 people, you know. Because the project had just been developed during that time. So I was the type of person who they were attracted to. So Malcolm spoke. I was not. What he was talking about is things I had never heard before. Talking about the white man being the devil. I said, oh, that makes sense to me. I never thought of it that way, but but I at the same time I wasn't. I had a lot of friends who joined the Muslims, but I was too street. I was more wrapped up in listening to Charlie Parker and Miles Davis, which was the new music of that day. It was, as a young man, I was born in 1934, and so the kind of things that I was attracted to when young men my age, this was before anything with civil rights movement. Not that it wasn't present, not that it didn't have people like Langston Hughes. I mean, I'm rambling here, but I was brought up reading Black newspapers. That's when I look back, that's what educated me, about the world. I mean, my mother's sisters, my aunts, 2 of them went to the church, the same church that Paul Robeson's sister went to. My grandfather must have known Paul Robeson, but my grandfather was active. He was selected, not selected, but he was hired as one of the first Black postmen in the 1920s to be a postman in Philadelphia. The house that I moved in, was brought by my great grandmother, who came from Danville, Virginia, to Philadelphia in 1890 at the start of what was called the Great Migration of 6 million blacks. That's the other thing. I think it was more than that. The greatest migration in the history of the world, moved from the south to the north. So they came. So I come from a family, and I didn't even realize it at the time. Just looking back, I came from a family that were called race people. These were people that we now call, nationalists or what have you. But I came from that kind of family. The first church, the family church, when I was a kid, was Mother Bethel, which is the first black church in the history of the country. And it was known to have Harriet Tubman speaking there. Frederick Douglass visited there. This is before my aunts. We joined that church. But this was the kind of people that I was around, and some of these things must have stuck in, but I hadn't realized that as I said, I was used to having a double-breasted Boston shoes, designers, they wouldn't call it designer suits, but double-breasted suits and big hats. I mean, I grew up in a neighborhood where a lot of my friends, we grew up wanting to be with what kind of gangster we wanted to be. What reform school that we wanted to go to. I mean, and that was normal. It was normal to me. So when I see myself, I visited St. Petersburg, Russia in the year 2000. And I'm sitting at the Pushkin Institute, sitting alongside the bed where Pushkin was assassinated. I said to myself, how the hell did I get here? I mean, I met so many, blessed with so many people organizing rent strikes. Being one of the chief spokesmen, some say leader. I'm quite sure that these were a bunch of guys who were alpha males. If you ever did see, that had picked up the call from Martin Luther King and from Malcolm X and joined the struggle. But it wasn't just the brothers in Albany. These kind of groups popped up all over the nation. In the Chicago was the WSO organization, West Side organization, with a guy by the name of Chester Robinson, which if it wasn't for Chester and his organization ability, Martin King wouldn't have been successful when he came to Chicago to make his regional civil rights movement into a national movement. But to be around these people, in terms of organizing civil rights demonstration against the building of the mall, not just taking on the unions, but taking on the contractors and taking on the and confronting people involved with the Buffalo family, the crime family, standing up against these young men and women who took a risk took a chance of fighting for not just a job for himself, but a job for all blacks. To the point that this country, and you know, it, when we were picketing the South Mall and the State University of Albany, State University we was picketing, they had 2 black students. You know, when you think of most of our major universities at that time had not graduated one black since the history of the country.
Wow.
You know, and you know, I remember taking a bus and going down to Greensboro, North Carolina, because the Klan had killed five communist workers and civil rights workers. And this is going down, and marching through those streets. And at the same place where the Klan had just killed 5 of going there, walking through those streets, the silence and whatnot, and realizing that the same thing could happen, but having to demonstrate, because we knew that if we let them intimidate us, that could kill our movement. And that I remember sitting up, I don't know if that meeting Stokely was, but I remember in Washington, D.C. at the Harambe House. And the Harambe House was Howard University restaurant and hotel that they had at the Howard University, and sit there. And these young men talking about how they had to go back down to register to vote, that they couldn't let the Klan, we let the Klan intimidate us in that, let them scare us, it would kill our movement. And the sacrifice. So, you know, so I look at the modeling of selfishness, the sacrifice that people made. It shaped my life. It made me a young man, young man, in my late 20s. But each time I see it, you know.
So, Leon, our time is up for today.
Oh.
And the next time we do a video like this, we'll talk about the brothers.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. I was just, you know, like one of the things, and I just, because I guess that one of the things is, one of the significant things in the civil rights that we need to put down, which that this phenomenon of the brothers was not unique to Albany.
Okay.
These groups sprung up. In fact, these groups sprung up all over the country. A lot of times in the North, I'm talking about, right? That I found that when I go to conferences, go to conventions, and what have you, that the brothers weren't that unique. That King and them inspired the rebellion, the resistance. So men and women, sometimes they were all men groups like the brothers, but the brothers by any stretch of the imagination, was not all men. We had people that joined us of every race, of every religion, people, you know, that it would, in and of themselves became heroes. I think of Vera Michelson. When I met Vera, she was a student at Russell Sage.
Mm-hmm.
She was a junior or a senior. That's when I met her.
Okay.
You know, good.
Okay, so we should talk about that in the next show because our time is up.
Yeah, no, I know. I know it's up. I'm just giving some why I think of it. It's some
Okay.
grist for the mill.
So,
You
so
know,
you've been listening to Leon VanDyke. I'm Cynthia Pooler. This is Focus on Albany. Leon, it's a pleasure talking with you, and thank you everybody for listening. Have a great day.
I feel as if I ramble too much.